So today, we're going to dive into the story of a small meeting in a small town that ended up sparking a revolution. We're talking about the very first Women's Rights Convention, held in Seneca Falls, New York, and the world that made it so incredibly necessary.
You know, to really get why this convention was such a massive deal, you have to understand the world it was born into. In the mid-1800s, the whole idea of women's rights was literally a joke to most people. I mean, it wasn't just unpopular, it was seen as going against nature itself.
All right, so let's break it down. What exactly was a woman's place in American society back then? Well, to put it mildly, it was extremely limited, and it was defined by this really rigid set of beliefs about where she belonged.
And wow, this slide right here, it really shows you how systemic this all was. This wasn't just a matter of opinion, you know? It was treated like science, it was baked into the law. The so-called truth was that women's brains were smaller and inferior, which meant educating them was just a waste of time. Their whole world was supposed to be the home, and God forbid a woman speak in public. That was seen as totally unfeminine.
And get this. This example just perfectly illustrates how deep this way of thinking went. Even at a place like Oberlin, the very first college in the entire country to admit women, the female students were still required to do domestic chores for the male students. We're talking washing their clothes, cleaning their rooms. So even in the most progressive spaces, progress had some very clear limits.
So, with a society this restrictive, where on earth did the first whispers of change even come from? Well, believe it or not, they came out of another huge fight for freedom. The abolitionist movement, the fight to end slavery, ended up being the unlikely training ground for the women's rights movement.
I love this quote from the activist Abby Kelly because it just nails it. As women poured their hearts into freeing enslaved people, they had this huge aha moment. They realized that while they were fighting to break the chains of others, they themselves were also in chains, just different ones. They had almost no legal or political power of their own.
So that realization lit a fire under a whole generation of some truly incredible women. It's time to meet the pioneers who took that frustration and turned it into a full-blown movement.
Okay, first up, you've got Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was, for all intents and purposes, the brains of the operation. Growing up, she'd watched her father, a lawyer, and saw firsthand how the law completely boxed women in. That experience made her the movement's brilliant philosophical force and its powerhouse writer.
And you can't talk about Stanton without talking about her indispensable partner, Susan B. Anthony. She was the organizer, the strategist. They called her the Napoleon of the women's movement for a reason. If Stanton wrote the game plan, Anthony was the one on the ground making sure the team executed it perfectly. They were an absolute dream team.
Then there's the incredible Lucretia Mott. She was kind of the wise elder of the group. As a respected Quaker minister and a total veteran of the abolitionist cause, she brought this weight and moral authority to the new movement that was just crucial. She was a mentor to so many, especially a younger Stanton.
And you absolutely have to know about Lucy Stone. This woman was a force of nature, an incredibly powerful speaker. And remember that Oberlin College we just talked about? Well, she was one of the very first women in America to ever get a college degree from that exact school. She was not about to be silenced.
And finally, there was the unforgettable Sojourner Truth. Born into slavery, she brought a perspective that no one else could. She escaped to freedom and dedicated her life to speaking truth to power. She couldn't read or write, but her words, spoken from her own lived experience, well, they were more powerful than any speech someone could have written for her.
So you have all these amazing, powerful women starting to connect the dots. But what was the one event that finally pushed them over the edge? What was the final straw? Well, it was a moment of absolute public humiliation on the world stage.
Okay, picture this. It's 1840. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott travel all the way to London for the World Anti-Slavery Convention. They're there to fight for human freedom. And what happens when they arrive? They're told they're not allowed to take their seats. They, along with the other women, were forced to sit in a separate section, hidden behind a curtain, just because they were women. The irony is just staggering. And right there, in that moment, they looked at each other and basically said, that's it, we're going home and we're holding a convention for our rights.
And they weren't kidding. 8 years later, it happened. July 19th and 20th, 1848, in a small chapel in Seneca Falls, New York. Over 300 people showed up for the world's very first convention to discuss the rights of women. And it's so important to note that about 40 men were there too, standing with them.
Now, they didn't just want to talk. They wanted to create something concrete, a document, A manifesto, really, that would take America's most treasured promises and demand, once and for all, that they apply to everyone.
And this is where Elizabeth Cady Stanton's brilliance just shines. She was the main author of this document, which they called the Declaration of Sentiments, and her big idea was just pure genius. She took the most sacred text in American history, the Declaration of Independence, and she decided to edit it. Just look at this side by side. It's so simple, but so incredibly powerful. Where Thomas Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal," Stanton adds two little words, "All men and women are created equal." Boom. And then, where the original listed all the problems with King George, Stanton's version lists 18 grievances against the tyranny of men over women.
Now, the Declaration had a bunch of resolutions for action, but there was one, Resolution number 9, that was so out there, so completely radical for its time, that even many of the supporters there thought it was going way too far. And what was it? The demand for a woman's right to vote.
Yeah, most people thought it was ridiculous. The resolution was about to be voted down. But then, one person stood up to speak for it, the great abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, the only African-American in attendance. He argued passionately that political power, the vote, was the key to every other right. Without it, he said, women could never truly be free. His speech completely turned the tide and the resolution passed, but just barely.
So, the convention was a massive, historic success. It created a roadmap, it set clear goals, and it officially launched a movement. But let's be real, this wasn't the end of the fight. It was just the official beginning of a very, very long road.
I mean, just look at this timeline. From that first demand for the vote in 1848, it would take 72 more years. 72 years of marches, protests, arrests, and just relentless organizing before the 19th Amendment was finally ratified in 1920. Almost none of the original women who were there at Seneca Falls lived to see it happen.
And that really gets to the core of it all. You see, the women of Seneca Falls didn't just want the vote. They wanted full personhood. They started what they called a contest for the rights of women as a moral, intelligent, and responsible human being. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In what ways is that contest still being fought today?